A big issue that we see facing us a lot of the time in modern politics today is the issue of Bothsidesism, when both sides are considered to be like, quote, very fine people. What does that mean? And how can we look at that information and understand the spread of extremism today? Hello, everyone. Just Max here today. With all the national events that have been going on, ice, Minnesota, and the weather here in Ohio being terribly cold, and I'm currently snowed in, today's episode is going to be a little bit different, a little bit more informal. I've still done a bunch of research that I want to share with you, but I will not be joined by a guest or anyone else today. And in the future, I hope to bring more typical programming back in. It's just today's going to be a little different, and I think it's good. I think we'll all be in it together. I'd also like to structure this episode largely around the topic of Bothsidesism, with an honorable mention today for religious liberty and how that ties into the issue of false equivalence in a time of state violence. So to begin, it would probably be good to just say a word about what Bothsidesism is. I found a good article on theconversation.com written by media ethicist Dennis Mueller, where he defines Bothsidesism as a mode of reporting that presents both sides of an issue without regard for their relative evidentiary merit, which is kind of a fancy way of saying, like, we're putting them on the same level, and we're not looking into the details and the nuance here. I guess Yale historian Timothy Snyder, who I believe has a book on authoritarianism, described this posture as, quote, suicide for democracy, because in moments of political crisis, treating unequal actors as moral equivalents inevitably advantages those seeking to undermine democratic norms. So you can probably see why I'm talking about this, even without me making it explicit yet, because that is such a big issue in our society today, and with current events specifically, where the way that things are talked about there's implications that there's more equivalency, or that there's more nuance, or even that, many times evidence is being misrepresented or treated as something different than what it actually is. More from Mueller's article here. Genuine impartiality does not require equal treatment of all claims. This is a paraphrase, by the way. I'm not quoting directly. It requires equal consideration guided by evidence. Balance, properly understood, follows the weight of the facts rather than an abstract commitment to symmetry. An abstract commitment to symmetry is such a good expression, because that really is what it feels like. It's like, well, we have to give equal time to both sides. Okay, but one side is calling for the indiscriminate killing of a whole race of people. How is that equal? Why should we be giving that an equal place? It calls to mind a debate I saw on Jubilee. It was called One Progressive versus 20 Far-Right Conservatives, but in it, he definitely drew a line when someone self-identified as a fascist and said, I don't debate fascists. There's just no point, because their position isn't, I have slightly different ideas than you. It's only my ideas are the right ideas, and everyone else should be like put away, whatever that means or implies. A lot of the time it's left vague, but we kind of know where that goes. So when appeals to both sides ignore these asymmetries of power and responsibility and harm, especially in the context of state violence, which is obviously why I'm bringing this up, they cease to be neutral and instead function to legitimize the status quo. So what I'm going to argue in this episode is that Bothsidesism is not merely a failure of analysis or journalism, but also a moral failure. It's a failure that we are morally okay with putting these things next to each other. And when Bothsidesism is invoked by authority figures, especially religious institutions or leaders in the government, then it also becomes a bigger problem. For the religious part, then it becomes a theological problem. It's hiding coercion and injustice in language that implies genuine concern for the common good. Like, the language is implying the right things, but the actions are not aligned. So before I get even more into it, I just want to mention and remind everyone of some recent episodes that touch on themes and topics that are highly relevant to the current moment. We have done a lot of writing and podcasts on my Substack, maxwellkuzma.com, alongside my co-writer and friend Emma Cieslik, on topics such as high control Catholicism, Christian and Catholic nationalism. The last episode prior to this one is about what American Catholics get wrong about persecution. And we also have turned in a more hopeful direction at times with an episode on queer liberation theology in a time of saint violence. That's an episode that really tries to present a path forward by showing how people have gone before. And I think that is a huge issue, an important touch point is to know people have gone through these things before, and what did they do, and what can we learn from them, and what historical solidarity can we feel from learning their stories? Like, how does that build us up and help us with food for the journey? I also want to spend a little bit of time on fascism here because Bothsidesism operates as an effective on-ramp for fascism, because fascism thrives on normalization. Normalization is a huge issue, often created through jokes and memes and stuff like that. False balance and appeals to order and civility, especially when those appeals come from a group of people who are like claiming some type of innate authority. So in particular, if you haven't listened to our episode, which is called Fighting Fascism with Dr. Joan Braun, I highly recommend checking it out. Joan is a scholar of fascism, and we were able to speak with her, interview her in September of 2025. So it was a really important conversation where we covered a lot of ground regarding the Christian nationalism building blocks that have led to this moment, as well as something I find really fascinating, which is the idea of a romanticized nostalgia for a non-existent past. This is something that's really common within the right wing, where they're trying to rewrite history and say that, everything was perfect and only nuclear white families existed in the 1950s and we need to go back there. So many things wrong with that we don't have time. We don't have time to unpack all of that, but that's the main concept. You can see this in this context with someone like Steve Bannon. We have these right-wing nationalist Catholics like him who have been key players in the rise of Trump. Steve Bannon is one who has this idea of the cyclical vision of history. And there's a meme that kind of expresses this, that, again, the on-ramps in some of these authoritarian groups and power groups, you use memes and use jokes and things like that. So the meme is, strong men create good times, and then weak men create bad times, and then it's this cycle. So like basically the idea is that like you've got the strong men who are authoritative and powerful, and they create the good society, but then that good society means that then you have like lazy, or I don't know, not people who don't, men who don't have, it's always men, so I'm putting in the context of men, but people who don't have, the desire to change or make things happen because society is too good, things are too easy, and then it's just kind of this repeating thing. So first of all, very darkly cynical that like that's just how reality would be, but also you can see how it clearly feeds into, these guys are going to Hulk out and they're going to have their mythologized masculine role in society. It's, it ties into the manosphere. It ties into this fixation on power and dominance as the only way to prove or justify masculinity, to the point where it becomes self-parody. That's something we've also talked about on this podcast. Our episode with Willow on that is really good. our episode with Willow on that topic is called How Purity, Power, and Fear Police Masculinity. So there's a little bit more about that. But yeah, that cyclical vision of history thing is really interesting to me because I think it really ties in, it creates such rigid certainty. And that certainty that the believer, the person who believes in it, has properly identified their point in history and their role. It's like, I know what stage we're in and I know what my job is to do right now. Which is also such a high control thing, right? Like there's zero openness to the beautiful surprises of what life could actually be like. There's just this cold determination to use manipulation, violence, and coercion to impose their idea of what is right. Another good element to mention with fascism is Jones' definition that it is a social movement seeking power, always already connected to existing structures of power. So we tend to think of fascism as this big, scary thing, powerful, authoritarian, but we also often forget the on-ramps. So it's always like, well, how could anyone have been okay with that? Well, it's like they didn't just become completely powerful and authoritarian overnight. They built on-ramps and they built a way to get to that point. We forget about the socialization part, the fact that they had social movements, things, like the Hitler youth camps, like Boy Scouts, but for this authoritarian project. Today, it's often through these online meme boards, trolling, gaming. Not always, but there are pockets of it, And Trump actually represents a great example of how authoritarian power pushes the envelope and tests out extreme messaging, only to fall back on just joking as an excuse if he gets too much outcry. But even in doing that, even in creating this like, oh, I was just joking, he's still pushing the envelope. And that is pushing the Overton window. The Overton window, popularized by Joseph P. Overton in the 1990s, maps ideas from unthinkable to popular, shifting over time to reflect changing societal norms. I also thought it was interesting when I was looking into that term, that it also mentioned politicians generally operate within this window to remain electable, while activists aim to shift it. And I feel like that is something that could be deeply unpacked as well. Just this idea of like, I don't know, honestly, it's like a respectability or, acceptability politics, where it's like, how much do I need to assimilate in order for my view or my position to be accepted? Like, it's just a dangerous thing for the truth or like true rights, true diversity, things that are really important to get lost because someone is so busy trying to represent themselves in a way that other members of a dominant group will accept and will go along with. It's a really difficult, convoluted thing for sure. I want to shift now to also talking about when Donald Trump posted that AI image of himself as the Pope. It feels like it was a really, really long time ago now because so many other things have happened, including so many other AI images. The AI slopification of the internet. But I think that's a great example, and it ties into somebody that I want to bring up here, who is Bishop Robert Barron. This is such an awkward transition here. I'm like trying to do so many things, but I want to just fill in a little bit about Bishop Barron for people who don't know before I get into why I'm drawing this connection. So Bishop Robert Barron, he is in charge of the Diocese of Winona-Rochester in Minnesota, which is roughly 2 hours southeast of Minneapolis. He's also the founder of a nonprofit called Word on Fire, a media organization largely centered around slick video production of Barron commenting on movies or pieces of culture. But also Word on Fire did a lot of theology programs, and I think a lot of people really enjoyed them because they were well produced and visually beautiful. Like, I think that was genuinely a draw for a lot of people. However, he has also become a controversial figure for a lot of reasons. And there's a lot of writing that has been done on this on the internet. Even a good, easy place to find a lot of it would be the National Catholic Reporter, ncronline.org. I'm a columnist there, just for disclosure, but they do a great job. And so some of the highlights, though, of like what I would say for issues, controversial things, primarily I would say the way he handled allegations of sexual harassment by a senior staff member at Word on Fire. Again, you can find reporting about this easily. His apparent propensity for hiring male bodybuilders into senior staff positions at Word on Fire. Again, reported online, National Catholic Reporter and others. But most importantly, I guess most recently, the way that his political actions have been under scrutiny, things that he has endorsed or positions that he's been in. So we'll unpack this a little bit more, but the reason I bring him up at this moment is because with the Trump AI Pope image, he actually went to bat for Trump by saying he was just joking. So again, this is a normalization tactic for pushing the envelope. And also, at the time, many people pointed out how, many in American Catholic hierarchy, so bishops, priests, would probably have melted down and lost their minds a lot more if a Democrat had done something like this. But because it's Trump, it's like it gets brushed off and pushed aside, which again feeds into the normalization. I hope I'm not repeating myself too much here, but it's also tied together, and so that that's what we're unpacking here. But yeah, so he's also on Trump's so-called Religious Liberty Commission, which I view as essentially an arm of Christian nationalist power expressed through the current administration, arguing that Christians are under attack and being persecuted, despite the fact that they literally have all the control and the reins of power. When they say Christians are persecuted, what they're often really saying is that they view persecution as being in any space that doesn't explicitly center Christianity. They're outraged about a rainbow pride flag being seen at a public school, yet they want to have the 10 Commandments displayed in the courthouse. They want to institute Christian prayer in schools. I think there is a program in Ohio where I'm based that is basically like, we're going to take you out of public school for an hour to go to this Christian programming. It's wild. It's just wild that that people who are saying we're being persecuted, secular society doesn't like Christians. Meanwhile, the Christians who have all the power and control and everybody else is getting driven out and banned. And yeah, that's also a huge other one to unpack. So much to say about so many things in this episode. This is a good example of how this is a more informal one, because you get to really see a behind the scenes look at how squirrely my brain can be. But I really I want to focus on some of the barren stuff and the Bothsidesism, because I think that's the main point I want to make here. And maybe in the future we can explore some of those other topics. I also wanted to add that Barron in particular has been an eager mouthpiece for this idea that Christians are being persecuted. I've seen him speak a lot about this big bad boogeyman of secular culture. He's also been interesting. I think he talked about the Second Vatican Council as, he called it beige Catholicism. And I think that was his way of saying, like, this is getting too touchy-feely. This is getting too social justice-y. Second Vatican Council is where a lot of Catholic social teaching comes from. And that Catholic social teaching is all that stuff that actually involves putting your money where your mouth is, the preferential option for the poor, human dignity. Like, what is it? What is Catholicism when it's not these rigid, okay, have you gone down the checklist and done the things? Okay, but like, what does it actually look like to live out these Christian Catholic values? Like, what so Catholic social justice or Catholic social teaching gives you that roadmap. Anyway, Barron is an important player in this conversation here on false equivalence, and perhaps no more perfectly expressed than in an article he actually wrote for Fox News on January 21st, weeks after Renee Good's death on January 7. So again, he wasn't interviewed for Fox for this. He literally published an essay on their website under his name. It's titled, Minnesota's Crisis Demands Real Change, Not More Division, with a very important subtitle here, Everyone on all sides must stop demonizing their opponents. So this is the pattern. This is the Bothsidesism. So you bring up a real crisis, but then you shift the focus to the tone. So suddenly now we're policing how we're talking about this and how people are reacting. And then you collapse the moral weight. So, and you make it so that even if there's an unequal power dynamic or anything like that, you collapse all of that, put everybody on the same level, and then you get to present yourself as if you're the one speaking logically and rationally. Anybody who has ever dealt with an abusive partner probably understands this, when it's like you're treated as if you're being completely irrational to be upset about something, and that they are the only calm voice of reason, which is problematic for so many reasons, but also just really unhealthy. Because being upset about something in and of itself is not a bad thing. You're allowed to be upset. You're allowed to have emotions. You're allowed to process and feel your emotions. So for someone to be trying to be like, okay, I'm the calm one and you're the problem because you're upset. Okay, that already is creating a bad dynamic as well. So you can see how this is echoed. We can also bring up how Trump actually used the phrase both sides as well. It was in August of 2017. So rewinding back the clock almost a decade. He was at a press conference discussing an executive order he'd signed on infrastructure permitting, but he was being asked about his response to violent protests at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, where he said, quote, "You also had people that were very fine people on both sides," end quote. Interestingly, when I was looking that up, because I remembered that, because it really stood out as, what are you even saying, dude? This is not a situation where you've just got two calm, peaceful people sitting across from each other having a conversation. That's what he made it sound like. But when I was looking it up, I learned that when Biden declared his candidacy for the Democratic nomination in 2019, he actually recalled this comment and said, quote, "With those words, the President of the United States assigned a moral equivalence between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it," end quote, which honestly, it's kind of a banger quote. Not to give Biden the W too easily here, but that's a great response to, and characterizes it really, really well. So back to Barron with his Fox News op-ed, which again, I still really can't believe that. I can, but I guess with Barron, it's always I can't believe he did that, but then it's I also can believe that he did. But he literally wrote an op-ed for Fox News. In it, he puts the topic of fraud and the protest sparked by the killing of Renee Good on the same level. And in this way, he's actually kind of copying the playbook of J.D. Vance, who responded to Renee Good's death in a White House press conference, alleging without evidence that she was this radical and possibly even mentally unwell activist, while also announcing a new attorney general position, I believe it was, to conduct fraud probes specifically in Minnesota, but also beyond. That's exactly what J.D. Vance did. So it kind of felt to me like Barron was copying this playbook, which is also a really big red flag for a lot of reasons. Not just politically, but basically, Barron is supposed to be a pastor. He's supposed to be a minister, a spiritual leader. He's supposed to exist outside of partisan politics and follow the example of the Pope Francis, and now Pope Leo, who have laid out how you shepherd a global church. Catholicism isn't American. I feel like we need a dramatic pause for that. Catholicism is not American. Like, American nationalism and Catholicism, two different things. A lot of American Catholics are getting them all smooshed together and feeling that they are one and the same, kind of like this idea of white Republican Jesus, where it's like Jesus is who we say he is because we own him in a way, like we have decided who he is and he supports our agenda. But yeah, there is a difference between having a national identity, being from a certain nation, and being Catholic or being part of Catholicism. In this country, Christian nationalism has poisoned the well in many ways, unleashing an authoritarian religion that I don't think Jesus would really recognize. And that's something that a lot of people have been talking about. A lot of people who were raised Catholic or raised Christian and drifted away when the culture war talking points started to become all the rage. Now they're looking at what's gone on and they're saying, this isn't even like what you taught us back then. Like, what are you guys even doing now? J.D. Vance, as a Catholic convert who basically exclusively parrots Christian nationalist talking points, is kind of a prototype for right-wing politics designed to capture Catholic voters, and someone who has actually been corrected by two popes for misusing Catholic theology as an excuse to exclude rather than welcome thy neighbor. Again, not really aligning with what the values of the gospel would actually suggest. So clearly, Vance is right-wing and clearly not a good example of what a Catholic should be. I wrote in my notes, no wonder Barron is copying him, which is admittedly a little bit savage, but I mean, that's kind of how it feels. So he's writing for Fox News, a media network that doesn't really get more partisan. I described it in my notes as an unreality network that prioritizes sensationalism without any regard for evidence or actual journalism. They present themselves as if they're Fox News, that they're just another news organization, but it's not about reality. It's not about actual evidence. We have a narrative. We have something we're trying to sell and tell people, and we're going to send out our reporters and cameras until we get it. That's what it really feels like. So in the actual essay, I know I've spent so much time talking about the fact that he did it, but not the essay itself yet. He treats the idea of fraud, ICE action, and people protesting ICE all as parallel outrages, so on the same level, in an attempt to purposefully obscure the asymmetry between institutional power and violence and civilians responding to it. He further constructs a false equivalence by condemning inflammatory language about ICE while minimizing the violence of the immigration enforcement itself, casting protesters, local officials, undocumented immigrants, and federal agents as a volatile mix, colliding together, language that diffuses accountability and subtly shifts the blame onto those resisting harm by emphasizing the tone, shouting, demonizing, over the substance, and by presenting his own position as a reasonable middle while citing partisan figures and outlets like Fox News and Christopher Rufo as neutral truth tellers. His essay frames dissent as equal to abuse of power, thereby legitimizing the status quo under the guise of civility. I mean, there you have it. That's what I said in my notes, and I think that's a great way to summarize how this shifting works. I think it's really important to call stuff out like this, not just because Barron himself is wrong to be doing this, which I think he is, but because I think we also need to unmask these strategies. Fundamentalist or high control religion demands complete obedience to the group's authority, which ironically erases an individual's ability to think in a moral way. I say ironic because many times they actually believe they are acting in a more moral way, or a more just way, because that is the claim of the fundamentalist or high control group they're in. So again, the problem isn't just that Barron is making a bad argument, but that he is doing so from a position of religious power that he expects to go unquestioned. That's big. Like that's complicated and big. Like that is heavy, and very dangerous. Also, from a Christian perspective, it should be deeply unsettling, because Scripture is not neutral about power. Jesus isn't neutral about power. Jesus was killed by the state. And the consistent biblical witness is about asking who is being oppressed, who is being crushed, who benefits from the system doing the crushing. Any theology that refuses to ask that question has basically already taken a side. And I think it also leads to a lot of contradictions and cognitive dissonance that I think in many ways seem very bizarre to those who are not involved in that type of high control groupthink. Like, for example, what do you mean J.D. Vance was a speaker at this year's March for Life on January 23rd? Like, what does pro-life mean to you if your advocacy begins with an unborn baby, but ends the moment that that baby is born, that that baby is poor, that baby is not white, that baby needs social services and infrastructure to survive? The activism against abortion revolves around a similar moral paradox, where you must stridently believe your position is the morally superior one. It forces you to ignore the reality of the gray areas that get pregnant women killed because the medical procedure that will save her life is legally classified as an abortion, even in cases when the baby is already deceased. And I'd just like to note that I'm actually not making an argument here about abortion, even though people that are within this siloed black and white view will hear it that way. I'm just wanting to lay out how this erases your ability to actually do a moral, like engage morally at all. It just feels so unjust that the people who believe they are the most moral or acting in the most moral way are so often just operating from certainty, that certainty. They're not operating in reality. It's not actually true. They just have this confidence that then they carry out into the world and they go do all these things, but it's not true, and it's not a real reflection of human dignity and things like that. There are many complicated gray areas. I'm a transgender man. I understand that there are a lot more gray areas than people want to admit. I understand that but biological reality is they think that that's like a catch-22, like, oh, there's only men and women, that's it. And the one that you are from birth that's it for forever. So like, why is transition possible? Like, why am I sitting here today? Like, why are there people that have chromosomal, complexities? Why are there intersex people? And they want to just ignore and refuse to engage with those questions because, again, it doesn't work for their rigid framework. So let's go back to Bothsidesism here just for a second and talk about how this isn't just something that is intellectual, but also works on our nervous systems. Basically, it promises relief from the discomfort of moral ambiguity. I get it. Like, these are not easy things to think about or talk about. Like that example that I just gave about abortion, that's not easy. How do you navigate the complexities there? It would be much easier to just have this rigid idea, this rigid law, but that doesn't take into account and doesn't respect the true ambiguity, the true reality of the situation. This is why thought-terminating cliches work. This is why they're possible and work on people. They insulate you from the overwhelming work of thinking and feeling through reality, through what's really going on. So many of us are out of touch with our emotions that even trying to just sit with some of these issues for a short time can completely short-circuit us. There's a reason that the term doom scrolling emerged from the COVID pandemic. It was specifically originated by journalist Karen Ho. and people's inability to look away from the constant stream of news and information that affected their friends and families, their hobbies, their livelihoods. The world was altered forever, and in many ways, so were our nervous systems. In glorifying intellectual pursuits and rationality above all, we've left emotional regulation behind, a process that is inherently and innately human. We're not machines that can perform perfectly in the factory assembly line, and I would say thank God for that. We are unique, dynamic, diverse, creative, beautiful, and powerful. But we don't have access to all of our God-given gifts if we refuse to encounter our own emotions and our own selves. Cognitive dissonance and contradictions are not going to save us. Moral certitude, this idea of that there is one single moral certitude, is not going to save us. And honestly, it may also not save us. It probably won't save us to also call these things out, because for the people who have their heads buried deepest in the sand, there's no incentive to pull their head out. For them, the system is functioning as designed. And this makes me think of a post that I saw recently from X. It was from a woman who wrote a book called Toxic Empathy: How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion. Obviously not a book anyone reads to learn about how to be more loving. Like, I don't know how you, I mean, I do know how. It's the grifting, it's the whole thing. But like, it is hard for me, even me, as I'm saying. I know that they don't actually have an awareness of the cognitive dissonance. I know that pushing on that and mentioning that isn't going to wake them up really, because they just live with it, but it's still so jarring to see. But anyway, it was on January 24th that she wrote the following, quote, "Dems are winning the media war in Minneapolis. Republicans have played decent defense, but we need more stories and images showing the professionalism and compassion of ICE and Border Patrol, as well as stories/images of the victims of illegal alien violence," end quote. So many things wrong with this. But we could probably start with the fact that, like, I don't think Democrats are winning. Like, I mean, I look on social media and I see Democrats posting things, and then I see all of the comments of people saying, hey, can you actually, like, do something about this? Instead of just being like, this is wrong, this is an outrage. People are like, can you actually do something? So she's already boiling it down into a media war, which I also think is like a repugnant way to talk about like what's actually happening. But it's also just not true that like Dems are winning. And then to her second point about stories and videos of the professionalism, you know, don't you think that if those images and videos existed, that they would be sharing them? This is a very image focused, video focused administration. Like, if they had good videos, I think they'd be showing them. Those ICE agents, you know, they wear GoPros. They record things with their phone. Jonathan Ross literally recorded a first-person point of view video with his phone when he shot Renee Good. They have video. They have media. I know inevitably there's going to be, you know, footage rolled out. There's going to be like a model ICE detention facility that people are allowed to go in. But why do you think that people are not allowed to go into all the other ones? Like senators, like people are just not allowed to know what's going on. Clergy are not allowed to go in to minister to people or take communion to them. So I just thought it was very disingenuous and just a really good example of, you know, trying to make something into something that it's not. I don't know how this fits like direct line into Bothsidesism, but it's just like, how can I talk about this, or how can I just like impose a way of thinking about this onto this situation that makes me feel better, makes me feel more comfortable, but doesn't actually speak to or address what's actually going on. I also want to say someone who does exemplify Bothsidesism directly, I think, is Ezra Klein, who is a columnist for the New York Times and has a podcast through the New York Times. So when Charlie Kirk was killed, Klein wrote a column for the New York Times titled "Charlie Kirk was practicing politics the right way," which I think is just absurd because Charlie Kirk was a grifter who specifically designed gotcha scenarios for college students where he could trap them in a so-called debate that was really just an excuse to roll out his own talking points. Whenever he had to go up against seasoned debaters, he basically folded. His shtick was the illusion of debate, which, I wrote an essay about that on Substack, but we don't have to go into that. I think the title gives you the idea. But in a world where someone else tells you what to believe, no one cares that it's an illusion. They're just happy to watch the show. I wrote that in my notes, and I think it's really good. I think it summarizes it. It's, all the cognitive dissonance, all the distraction. I want to believe this is true. So if you're going to show it to me as if it is true, then I will believe it. That's just so difficult. That's so difficult to actually see happening, and see happening on such a scale that we're seeing it now. Again, I can't just boil it down the way that some of the grifters can. I can't just boil it down to one simple sentence to make everything better, to make you feel good that you don't have to engage with it. I think the answer is we have to engage with it. We have to go through the emotions that we are feeling about the things that are actually happening. We have to feel guilty for not being personally affected by something. We have to feel outraged by the fact that it takes violence of a certain level to make people care. Like, we have to, whatever those things are, like, I'm saying those examples as like, there are nuanced levels to this. We have to like feel them. Like, so often, you might feel guilty about something, but in not giving yourself permission to feel guilty, you're basically just extending the guilt. And like, I don't mean to like preach about emotional regulation here. And I'm not a psychologist or a trained mental health professional, so I don't have the authority to speak on these things. That's another reason I don't want to say too much about it. But I mean, that's the truth, is that those are the things that we need to take advantage of. We need to be able to engage in emotional regulation. We need to be able to experience what we are feeling and feel through it, to understand it, to honor it, to allow it to exist. Because if you just push everything down, if you just repress, that just makes you a repressed person, a repressed, unhappy, unhealthy person. And that doesn't do anybody good. That doesn't help make the world a better place, So, but yeah, I think for hope, I have a lot of hope. I remain hopeful and grounded because as long as like I'm alive and I'm breathing and I'm here, I know that there are things that I can do. I can't solve all of the problems in one go. I can feel overwhelmed that I can't solve those problems. I give myself time to feel that. And then when I'm done feeling that, when I've processed that, I focus on the things that I can do. And I focus on the stories, again, as I mentioned at the top, of the people who have made it through these things, like the people who have endured horrible things historically, and what they learned and what they have to teach us. Because many of them have been speaking for a really long time, and we just didn't listen because we were insulated from these issues for whatever reason. So no matter where you are in all of this, no matter what your identity is, where you live, first of all, I just want to say that I think there is something for you to do. There is, you have unique gifts and unique talents, and you can contribute to your world, the world that you exist in tangible, real ways. And I also think, one of the main points of this episode, and talking about these subjects, again, it's not to think about, it's not to talk about like, how can we reach those people? Because A, that's a separate conversation, and B, I think you have to be really careful because they are so entrenched. But really, it's to just help us all to make sense of what is going on, to understand more, to think through what it means when somebody does this. Because if we understand the role that people who are not, all the way in the extreme play in normalizing the extreme people, we can call out those people who are normalizing. I don't think you can really reach the extreme people, but I do think that you can say, hey, we don't allow this normalization. We don't allow these kinds of troll jokes and edgelord memes that are like secretly coded white power things. Like, we just don't allow that in our space. And from what I learned from our conversation with Dr. Joan Braun on fighting fascism, we also need to build positive social movements that are examples of what people can participate instead. And honestly, I have been very moved by seeing the people of Minneapolis out in the streets in great number, even when they have been personally encountering harm. They are still out there. They are still standing arm in arm with their neighbors. Like, hey, this is our home. These are our communities. These are the people that we care about, and we want them here with us. Like, that is such a powerful message. And again, not a lawyer, not a mental health professional. You gotta seek out those things yourself. But these are my observations, and I think as it relates to high control and fundamentalism, I think it's safe to say that being able to unmask and look through the illusion is a powerful and important thing. And the more people that we teach the ability to do that, the more prepared I think we all are to push back against the spread of extremism. So thank you so much for listening to this kind of unusual episode of Whiplash. I appreciate you being here. You can support the show in all the usual ways. Subscribing helps. Leaving a rating helps. If you really liked it and you want to leave a tip, I have links for that on Substack, where you can also become a paid subscriber. That also supports the show, and then you'll get an email every Monday when the show comes out. I really appreciate all those things that people do to support, and I'm continuing to work on additional programming that I'll bring you in the future. Thanks.